The sun was already leaning toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The little wooden church looked more beautiful than ever under that golden light. Simple flowers, picked by the neighbors, delicately adorned the altar. The chairs were full, and the guests fanned themselves with their hats, trying to ward off the heat that lingered even as the afternoon waned. It was meant to be a celebration. Elias Turner adjusted his rope tie for the third time. His calloused hands, used to the leather of reins and the weight of the plow, now trembled like those of a boy. His heart raced. He took a deep breath and murmured to himself, "It's going to be all right, Elias. She's coming." The pastor cleared his throat, glancing sideways at the door that remained closed. The minutes dragged on. The bell had already rung, and every eye was fixed on the entrance. Elias, motionless, stared at that door as if waiting for a miracle. Time passed. Whispers began to spread like wind through dry grass. "Do you think she gave up?" whispered a lady, fanning herself shamelessly. "Nobody disappears like this on their wedding day," murmured a man from the back, laughing under his breath. Each word cut Elias inside. Sweat ran down his forehead, not only from the heat, but from the shame growing within him. He tried to smile, but the smile vanished quickly, like a candle in the wind. The pastor cleared his throat again, uneasy. Finally, after an eternity that seemed endless, the bride's brother entered through the side of the church. He avoided looking at Elias. Slowly, he approached and, in a thin voice, Nada said, "Elias, she's not coming." The silence was so heavy it felt suffocating. A bird landed on the roof and sang, as if in mockery. Elias swallowed hard, his eyes brimming, but he did not cry, not in front of everyone. He only took a deep breath, lifted his chin, and murmured, "Then it's over." But inside, inside, the ground had opened beneath him. It was like falling from a galloping horse with nothing to hold on to. He walked toward the church door, each step echoing louder than any sermon. Some looked at him with pity, others with scorn. Elias didn't know which hurt more. Being rejected by the woman who had promised eternal love, or being shattered before all those eyes. Outside, the sun blazed mercilessly. Dust clung to his sweaty face. Elias pulled his hat down low, hiding his shame, and walked away. His heart, once burning with expectation, now weighed like stone. And as he mounted his horse, a thought struck his chest like a branding iron. Maybe it's easier to tame a wild horse than to trust someone's heart. The dirt road was nearly deserted when Elias dismounted his horse in front of the wooden gate of his ranch. The sun had already disappeared, and the moon was rising shyly behind the hills. Dust still hung in the air, as if even the wind felt pity for leaving him alone in that moment. The silence was deafening. Only the creak of the gate betrayed his arrival. Inside the house, the table was set. Fresh bread, roasted meat, wine in a clay jug. Everything prepared for the celebration that never came to be. Elias looked at it the way one stares at a grave. He tore the rope tie from his neck and tossed it onto the chair. Then he sat down, elbows on the table, head in his hands. The food cooled before him, and the smell, once enough to stir an appetite, now only deepened his nausea. In his mind, the whispers from the church echoed, muffled laughter, cutting words. "Do you think she gave up?" Nobody disappears like that on their wedding day. Each memory was a thorn driven deeper. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. Elias took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He opened it and found old Tomas, neighbor and childhood friend. In his eyes was a mix of pity and unease. "Elias, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything, Tomas." Elias replied, firm, though his voice faltered. His friend hesitated, then placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't deserve this. What happened today doesn't define who you are. Elias averted his gaze, unable to believe those words. Maybe it doesn't, but it's the only thing everyone will remember. Tomasz sighed, squeezed his shoulder, and left without insisting. The creak of the gate closing was his last company that night. Alone, Elias lit the oil lamp and watched the flame dance. He thought about how life could change in a matter of minutes, from a groom about to start a new family to a man branded by shame. And outside, in the darkness, the howls of coyotes echoed as if mocking his pain. Elias whispered to himself, in a thin voice, I don't know if a man can bear so many wounds without breaking for good. The lamp's flame flickered, casting his crooked shadow on the wall, and in that instant, it seemed even his own shadow was abandoning him. Days went by. The morning sun slipped through the cracks of the window, but for Elias there was no difference between day and night. Insomnia had kept him company until the roosters crowed. He rose slowly, washed his face with cold water from the basin, and looked at the distorted reflection in the cracked mirror. You look 10 years older, he murmured to himself. Outside, the ranch was silent. The cattle lowed in the pasture, the horses neighed in the corral, but it felt as if even the animals sensed the weight hanging in the air. Elias fixed his hat on his head and went to work, trying to distract himself. Yet the town of Silverado Creek would not let him forget. When he arrived in town to sell milk, he heard the whispers at the general store. Look there, the abandoned groom! They say she ran off with a merchant from Denver. Elias pretended not to hear, but every word was like a bullet. He moved on, paying his bills in silence. At the blacksmith shop, he met Davy, a man of few words. Davy only nodded, but his eyes said what his mouth did not dare. Pity. The worst, however, came late in the morning, when he passed in front of the church. The withered flowers still clung to the door, a cruel reminder of the day that should have been the happiest of his life. He stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and walked on, swallowing his pain like bitter poison. Back at the ranch, he tried to find solace in work. He chopped wood with fury, each swing of the axe carrying anger, frustration, shame. Sweat ran down his face. Mingled with tears, he refused to let anyone see. While resting, seated on a fallen log, he stared at the horizon. The wind blew hard, raising dust, and Elias reflected. Maybe that's what I am now, dust carried by the wind. But even amid sorrow, something inside him resisted, a flame nearly invisible that refused to go out. A soft voice whispered, "It's not over yet." That very afternoon, Elias decided to take a horse to be reshoed. He needed to keep his mind occupied, even if it was just by tending to the animals. On the road to town, the sun was already beginning to sink, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The breeze carried the sweet scent of wildflowers, and for a fleeting moment he almost forgot the weight he carried. Then, by the side of the dusty road, he spotted a wagon stopped. One of the wheels had broken, and a young woman was struggling in vain to fix it on her own. Elias reined in his horse, dismounted, and approached. "Do you need help, miss?" She turned, surprised. Helena. Her face was graceful, framed by loose strands of golden hair tousled by the wind. There was in her a natural, almost radiant beauty that needed no adornment. Her clear, intense eyes could hold anyone's gaze. And yet that beauty carried with it a quiet strength, as though life had demanded more of her than it should. "I would be very grateful." The wheel came off, and I couldn't fix it. Elias examined the wagon, propped up the wheel, adjusted the makeshift bolts, and with some effort managed to set it back in place. As he worked, Helena watched in silence, admiring the calm and strength of that man. "Thank you, sir," "What did you say your name was?" she asked when he was done. Elias Turner," he replied, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I'm Helena, just passing through. I came looking for a place to start over." Elias nodded. There was something in her that went beyond beauty and kindness. It was as if her presence carried light, yet also hid a shadow. "Silverado Creek isn't easy on strangers, but if you need a place to rest, Mrs. Whitmore's Inn still takes travelers," he said, trying to be helpful. Helena gave a faint smile, a timid smile, but a true one. "Thank you, Elias. Today you saved me from spending the night on the road." Elias felt his heart beat differently. It wasn't love at first sight, no. It was something more subtle, recognition, as if two weary souls had crossed paths at just the right moment. And as he said goodbye and continued on his way, he didn't realize that, for the first time since the wedding, he had smiled, even if only a little. 2 days had passed since the encounter on the road. Elias believed he would never see Helena again, but when he stepped into the general store of Silverado Creek, there she was, wearing a clean dress, her hair simply tied back, with that graceful, beautiful face that seemed to draw every gaze. Some of the town's women whispered, suspicious. In such a small place, any stranger was cause for speculation. But Helena didn't seem shaken. With a steady posture, she asked for coffee and some provisions, as if she knew she would need to stay longer. Elias hesitated, then approached. "I see you managed to settle in here," he said, trying to sound natural. Helena smiled, that smile that seemed to brighten even the dusty air of the store. "Yes, I'm staying at Mrs. Whitmore's Inn, at least for now." A brief silence fell between them. Elias was not a man of many words, but something in him wanted to prolong the conversation. Silverado Creek can be harsh, but it can also be welcoming. "If you need anything, you can come to me." Helena looked at him with those clear eyes that carried both sweetness and some kind of secret. "Thank you, Elias. But I've learned not to rely too much on people. Sometimes life takes away the very thing we trust most." Her words struck him deeply. It was as if she spoke his own language of pain. For a moment, Elias saw himself reflected in her. "I know exactly what you mean," he replied softly. Before their conversation could go further, a group of men entered, laughing loudly. One of them, noticing Elias, mocked, "Well, if it isn't the abandoned groom, already finding another so soon." The entire store fell silent. Elias clenched his fists but didn't react. Helena, however, lifted her chin firmly. "Aren't you ashamed of mocking another's pain?" she said, staring at the man. The laughter died instantly. The man grumbled and left, followed by the others. Elias looked at Helena, astonished. He wasn't used to anyone defending him. "You didn't have to," he murmured. "Yes, I did," she replied calmly. "No one deserves to carry humiliation alone." Elias felt his heart tremble. In that woman, there was not only beauty and kindness, but courage, something he no longer believed existed. That afternoon, Elias returned to Mrs. Whitmore's Inn. He had brought corn for the animals, but deep down, what he truly wanted was to see Helena again. He found her sitting on the porch, the sun gilding her loose hair, her graceful, beautiful face lit by a calm expression, calm only on the surface, for her clear eyes held heavy secrets. "Elias," she said, lifting her gaze from the embroidery in her hands. "What a surprise!" He approached, scratching the back of his neck, a little awkward. "I thought I might rest here a bit, if it's not a bother." Helena gave a faint smile and gestured for him to sit beside her. The initial silence was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant creak of Mrs. Whitmore's rocking chair. At last, Helena spoke. almost as if releasing a weight that had been pressing on her chest. "Elias, I didn't come to Silverado Creek by chance. I ran away." He frowned. "Ran away from what?" Helena drew a deep breath, her voice trembling. "Dish, my parents sold me. They wanted to pay off the family debt. They arranged my marriage to a man who, besides being much older, had a reputation for cruelty. I discovered terrible things about him. Stories of women mistreated, of servants who disappeared. If I had accepted, I would have been putting my life into the hands of a butcher. So, I left without looking back." Elias felt his heart tighten. His first instinct was to think, she too left someone behind, just like it happened to me. A sharp pain pierced his memory. The empty altar, the mocking stares, the flowers withering before the church. But as he looked at her, he realized something different. Helena hadn't abandoned love. She had been forced to escape a prison. She hadn't had a choice. "Then," he said slowly, "it wasn't cowardice. It was survival." Helena lifted her tearful eyes to him. "I carry the guilt of disobeying my parents, but if I had stayed, I would have lost my soul." Elias stayed silent for a few seconds. He felt the conflict within him. Part of him still ached with the memory of the empty altar, but another part, deeper, recognized the courage in that woman, Helena. He said at last, his voice low and firm, "What you did wasn't weakness. It was the bravest decision anyone could make." A sigh slipped from her lips, as if for the first time someone truly understood her pain. And that night, as darkness fell over Silverado Creek, Elias realized that the loneliness he carried was not his alone. Two broken lives had found each other, still wary, yet already bound by something greater than destiny. In the days that followed, Elias and Helena began seeing each other more often, sometimes at Mrs. Whitmore's boarding house, sometimes at the market, or when he passed her on the road carrying a basket in her arms. There were no declarations, no promises, just simple conversations, exchanged glances, a quiet companionship that warmed both their hearts. But Silverado Creek was never quiet when it came to news, and soon the whispers began to spread. "That stranger has far too much of a mysterious air about her," one of the churchwomen murmured. "And now she's suddenly so close to Elias, poor fellow who was left at the altar. Doesn't that seem odd?" another replied. "I'd bet she's hiding something." Elias heard the rumors as he passed, pretending indifference, but each comment was like a thorn in his skin. He had already been humiliated once, and he didn't want to be a subject of mockery again. One morning, as he stepped into the blacksmith shop, Hank spoke in a low tone. "Elias, be careful. She's a pretty girl, but beauty sometimes comes with a price." Elias only nodded in response, but the doubt lingered. Could he trust Helena, or was he fooling himself again? Meanwhile, Helena also noticed the suspicious stares. At the boarding house, Mrs. Whitmore, kind yet curious, once asked, "My dear, where exactly did you come from? And why do you always seem to look over your shoulder, as if you're expecting someone?" Helena smiled, trying to disguise her unease. "I only carry heavy memories, ma'am, nothing worth reliving." But that very night, while walking alone on the porch, Helena saw a strange traveler on the street. He was watching her from a distance, with a look that chilled her to the bone. For a moment, she was certain someone tied to her past had arrived in Silverado Creek. The next day, she met Elias near the corral and, without realizing, clutched his arm tightly. "If one day my past comes knocking at the door, will you still believe me?" she asked, her clear eyes filled with fear. Elias looked at her in silence. The memory of the empty altar still hurt, but the courage of this woman made him want to take the risk again. "Helena, I don't know what's coming, but I do know that, unlike before, this time I want to fight together." Helena smiled with gratitude, though tinged with sadness. She knew the fight was closer than he could ever imagine. The atmosphere in Silverado Creek grew heavier. The mysterious traveler Helena had noticed from afar now lingered around town more often. Tall, dressed too finely for such a simple place, always with a cigar between his fingers, he drew attention wherever he went. He claimed to be from Denver, but revealed little more. At the saloon, the men murmured, "That strange fellow's been asking about a woman staying at the boarding house. Bet he's someone from her past." Elias overheard and felt his stomach twist. He remembered Helena's plea. "If my past comes knocking, will you still believe me?" One afternoon, the inevitable happened. Elias was at the market when the man approached. "You must be Elias Turner," the stranger said, his voice firm, dripping with disdain. "I'm Richard Mallory. I've come to collect what's mine." Elias frowned. "And what would that be?" Richard smiled coldly. "A woman named Helena. Her parents promised her to me in marriage. We made a deal, and I've already paid dearly for her. She may think she's run away, but no one escapes me." Anger surged hot in Elias's veins. "Helena is no object to be bought or sold." Richard leaned in closer, his words laced with threat. "If you don't hand her over, I'll drag your name and hers through the mud until this entire town spits when you pass by." Elias didn't answer. He only clenched his fists tighter, forcing himself to breathe instead of giving in to the urge to strike him right there. That night, he found Helena on the boarding house porch. Her graceful, beautiful face was shadowed, marked by fear. "He's here, isn't he?" she asked, her voice trembling. Elias nodded. "He is, and he said he came to take you." Helena wrung her hands in her lap, tears threatening to fall. "Elias, if you stay near me, you'll lose everything. They'll mock you all over again. I don't want to be the cause of that." Elias was silent for a long moment, gazing at the starlit sky. Then he laid his hand firmly over hers. "Helena, I was humiliated once without deserving it. If I have to face it all again, then let it be to defend something worth fighting for." Helena looked at him, startled, and in that moment she realized Elias was not just a wounded man. He was someone ready to fight. But she knew Richard Mallory would not give up so easily. The news spread quickly through Silverado Creek. Richard Mallory had challenged Elias Turner to settle accounts at the town's famous saloon. The place, usually noisy with laughter, clinking glasses, and the off-key piano, was that night heavy with silence and expectation. Everyone knew there would be a fight, and no one wanted to miss the spectacle. When Elias walked in, the creak of the floorboards seemed to echo louder than ever. His steady, fearless gaze showed he was resolved. Richard was already waiting at the bar, cigar between his fingers, a cynical smile on his lips. "Well, well, the jilted groom turned protector of damsels," Richard sneered, loud enough for all to hear. "Do you really think you can steal what belongs to me?" Elias drew a deep breath. "Helena doesn't belong to anyone." The crowd's murmur was immediate. Richard slammed his glass hard against the counter. "I paid for her rights. Her parents gave me their word." "Then keep your gold to buy silence in Denver. Here in Silverado Creek, a man's word is worth less than a woman's dignity." The tension burst. Richard lunged at Elias. The first punch came fast, but Elias dodged it. The scrape of chairs, people shouting, and shattering glasses filled the saloon. Richard yanked his gun from its holster. A collective gasp swept through the room. Elias stood firm, unflinching, his eyes locked on Richard's. "Going to shoot me in front of the whole town? Is that how you prove you're a man?" Richard hesitated for a split second. At that moment, the sheriff stormed through the doors. "That's enough," he barked. "If anyone pulls that trigger in here, they'll spend the rest of their life behind bars." Richard's eyes burned with hatred. Slowly, he holstered the gun, but before leaving he threw a warning over his shoulder. "This isn't over, Turner. She's mine by right, and I'll take her, even if it's by force." The saloon erupted in whispers. Elias stood still, chest heaving, but his gaze was unyielding. He knew this wasn't the end. The man had wealth, influence, and cruelty to spare. That very night, as Elias stepped out of the saloon, Helena was waiting for him in the street. The moonlight bathed her beautiful, distressed face. "Elias, you should stay away from me. That man won't stop. He could destroy your life." He walked closer, took her hands in his, and spoke in a low but steady voice. "Helena, I already lost what was most precious to me once. I won't lose you. If I must, I'll face the whole world." She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his shoulder in silence. In that embrace there was fear, but also the promise that they would no longer be alone. The morning after the showdown at the saloon, Silverado Creek seemed to hold its breath. Everyone knew Richard Mallory wasn't the kind of man to let an insult slide. People whispered on street corners, casting sideways glances at the boarding house where Helena was staying. At noon, the sound of hooves shattered the silence. Richard appeared, mounted on a black horse, imposing, his face tense, his eyes blazing with fury. He stopped right in front of the boarding house, a cloud of dust rising in the air. "Helena!" he shouted, his voice dripping with rage. "Come down now and come with me. You know you are mine by right." Windows flew open. Women pulled children inside. Men stood on the sidewalks, watchful. The sheriff appeared from the corner, his hand resting on his holster. Elias stepped into the middle of the street, arms crossed, and faced Richard. "She's not going anywhere with you." Richard let out a mocking laugh. "And who's going to stop me? You? The rejected groom who got left at the altar, or this small-town sheriff who'll sell himself for a glass of whiskey?" At that moment, Helena came down the steps of the boarding house. Her simple dress swayed in the wind, and courage blazed in her eyes. "Richard, enough. This whole town needs to know the truth." Her voice trembled, but it was steady. "My parents tried to sell me to you like merchandise, to pay their debts, but everyone here should hear this. You're not just a cruel man, you're a criminal." A murmur rippled through the street. Richard tried to cover it with a scornful smile. "Lies. You're nothing but an ungrateful, frightened girl." Then the sheriff stepped forward, his expression hard. His voice rang out with authority. "It's no lie, Richard. I've already been in contact with the authorities in Denver." He lifted a leather folder tucked under his arm. "Evidence has arrived. Letters, testimonies, proof. Fraud, violence against women, disappearances buried by your money. I was just waiting for you to show your face to act." The crowd held its breath. Richard paled for an instant, then tried to recover. "You can't prove anything here," he roared, his hand inching toward his holster. But before he could draw, two townsmen, old James from the blacksmith's and young Tom from the general store, were already at the sheriff's side, firm, ready to stop him. The sheriff pulled out the cuffs with authority. "Richard Mallory, you're under arrest until the Denver officials come to take you. Your arrogance is finished." Richard was disarmed and shackled before everyone. He struggled, cursed, shouted Elias and Helena's names, but no one listened. For the first time, neither his money nor his influence could save him. Helena, her eyes brimming with tears, turned to Elias. "I feared my story would drag you into the same abyss I carried, but now it seems everything turned against him instead." Elias took her hand, his heart racing but filled with relief. "You didn't drag me down, Helena. You showed me what's worth defending." The crowd began to disperse. Some clapped Elias on the back, others smiled at Helena. The whole town had witnessed the truth, and for the first time they weren't alone. The sun dipped behind the mountains of Silverado Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. The same small church that had once been the stage of Elias's greatest pain was now filled with people, not with cruel whispers, but with joyful anticipation. There was no longer any shadow of Richard Mallory. The man was in jail, and everyone in town had witnessed his arrogance being exposed. For the first time, Elias and Helena could walk without fear, carried not only by their love for each other, but also by the silent approval of the entire community. Inside the church, Elias adjusted his simple coat. His heart raced, but there was no shame this time, only emotion. He took a deep breath, remembering the day he had been humiliated there. God, who would have thought? The same altar that marked my downfall will now become the place of my redemption. The doors opened. Helena walked in, illuminated by the sunset streaming through the colored stained glass. Her graceful, beautiful, serene face now showed not fear, but hope. The murmurs died down. The sound of her steps echoed across the wooden floor, each one matching the pounding rhythm of Elias's heart. When she reached the altar, their eyes met. Helena smiled, and quiet tears welled in her eyes. "Elias," she whispered softly, "just for him. I thought I would only bring disgrace to your life. But you showed me that true love can turn even wounds into flowers." He squeezed her hands, his voice thick with emotion. "Helena, I once believed I was condemned to loneliness. But today I know sometimes life lets us endure shame only to prepare us for honor." The pastor opened the Bible and spoke with a voice both solemn and tender. "Today we celebrate not just the union of a couple, but the victory of truth over lies, of courage over fear, and of love over cruelty." Their "I do" rang out firm, like an eternal seal. And when their lips met, the church bells rang, not as mockery but as celebration. Outside, the entire town applauded. Children ran across the grass, women wiped away quiet tears, and even the toughest men nodded in respect. Elias and Helena walked out hand in hand through the church doors, wrapped in the soft light of the setting sun. The future would still bring challenges, but now they knew they would face nothing alone. And in that moment, Silverado Creek gained a new story to tell. The story of the cowboy who had been humiliated at the altar, but found true love in the most unlikely place. Sometimes it takes losing everything to discover what really matters. And when pain leads us to the truth, what is born from it is not weakness, but a love no one can destroy. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and get ready for more tales that will move you even more.